Fans assume technology in Star Trek follows a hierarchy of advancement, where some civilizations are simply more capable than others. Canon tells a different story. Factions with comparable scientific knowledge build incompatible tools, prioritize opposing functions, and refuse entire categories of innovation despite having the expertise to create them. The dividing line is not capability. It is doctrine. And doctrine is shaped by what each state fears losing more than what it hopes to gain. Technology in Star Trek is not a ladder, it is a mirror. The Federation presents faster than light travel, universal translators, and matter replication as the natural endgame of scientific progress. The Borg present assimilation cubes and adaptive shielding as evolutionary destiny. The Romulans present cloaking devices and singularity cores as tactical necessity. Each faction frames its technological suite as the rational outcome of capability meeting need. But canon repeatedly demonstrates that factions with comparable scientific understanding build radically different tools, prioritize incompatible functions, and reject entire categories of innovation despite possessing the expertise to create them. The Klingons have transporter technology but choose not to miniaturize it for personal use. The Cardassians have replicator technology but ration it even when energy reserves allow otherwise. The Dominion has shape-shifting bioengineering but refuses to integrate cybernetic enhancement. These are not accidents of development. They are choices. The pattern becomes visible only when the question shifts. Not what can each faction build, but what does each faction refuse to build? Not how advanced is their technology, but what does their technology optimize for at the expense of everything else? The answer is never raw capability. It is always control, survival, legitimacy, fear. Every major faction in Star Trek possesses the scientific foundation to replicate most of the others' signature technologies within a generation. What separates them is not knowledge, it is doctrine. And doctrine is shaped not by what works, but by what the state can afford to allow its population to possess. The deeper contradiction lies in this. Technological superiority, as measured by raw capability, almost never predicts victory, stability, or dominance. The Borg possess adaptive regeneration, distributed consciousness, and transwarp conduits, yet they are stopped by a single starship more than once. The Dominion possesses Ketracel-White dependency engineering, portable shrouding, and Jem'Hadar shock infantry, yet it loses a war of attrition to opponents with fewer ships and slower production. Superiority in gadgets does not translate to superiority in outcomes because technology is not neutral. It reflects the assumptions, paranoias, and institutional limits of the state that deploys it. And those limits are often invisible until the system is pushed past the threshold where workarounds stop working. What follows is not a catalogue of which faction has the best phasers or the fastest engines. It is an analysis of what each faction's technological choices reveal about the structure of power it is trying to preserve, the failure modes it is trying to avoid, and the costs it has decided are acceptable. The lens is simple. Every technology is a political artifact. Every weapon is a statement about what the state fears. Every convenience is a statement about what the state is willing to risk. And when factions collide, it is not the most advanced civilization that wins. It is the one whose technology aligns most closely with the conditions of the battlefield it is forced to fight on. The Federation optimizes for redundancy, adaptability, and plausible deniability. Its flagship technologies, warp drive, transporters, replicators, and holodecks, share a common design philosophy. They distribute capability across the population, decentralize production, and allow individuals to solve localized problems without waiting for centralized approval. A single starship can manufacture replacement parts, conduct first contact, perform scientific research, and defend itself against hostile forces without requiring a supply chain. The system is designed to function when cut off from the core. That is not a side effect, it is the point. But decentralization is also a vulnerability. When you give individuals the tools to act independently, you give them the tools to defect. The Federation cannot prevent a rogue officer from using a transporter to kidnap a dignitary, using a replicator to fabricate contraband, or using a holodeck to simulate illegal acts. The countermeasure is not technological lockdown, it is institutional culture. Starfleet relies on selection filters, training indoctrination, and peer monitoring to ensure that officers self-regulate. The system works as long as personnel believe in the institution. When that belief fractures, the technology becomes a threat multiplier. Section 31 exists because the Federation cannot afford to remove the autonomy that makes rogue actors possible. So it builds a shadow institution to manage the ones who slip through. On screen, we see this failure mode most clearly in The Pegasus. Captain Pressman develops a phasing cloak in violation of the Treaty of Algeron. The technology works. It grants the ability to fire while cloaked and pass through solid matter. It would represent a definitive tactical advantage over the Romulans. But Starfleet Command buries the project, not because the science is flawed, but because deploying it would require abandoning the treaty framework that legitimizes Federation expansion. The political cost of the advantage exceeds the military value. The treaty is not a constraint on capability, it is a constraint on what the Federation can afford to be seen doing. And that constraint shapes which technologies get funded, which get suppressed, and which get outsourced to intelligence agencies that operate without oversight. The transporter itself is a political artifact. It allows Starfleet to project force without maintaining massive shuttle fleets or landing infrastructure. It allows away teams to extract quickly under fire. It allows starships to resupply without docking. But it also allows hostile actors to insert operatives, extract prisoners, or deliver weapons directly into secured spaces. The countermeasure, transporter inhibitors and shields, is ubiquitous. Yet the Federation continues to build vessels where critical systems are accessible from the outside if shields drop. This is not an oversight, it is a calculated risk. The Federation has chosen to prioritize operational flexibility over hardened security because its doctrine assumes that most encounters will be resolved diplomatically before shields fail. When that assumption breaks, as it does in the Dominion War, the vulnerability becomes systemic. Replicator technology reveals the same tension. The ability to convert energy into matter on demand eliminates scarcity for basic goods. No civilization with working replicators should experience famine, homelessness, or supply shortages. Yet we see rationing on Deep Space Nine during the Dominion War. We see colonies struggling with resource distribution in multiple episodes. The bottleneck is not the technology, it is energy allocation and political priorities. Replicators require power. Power generation requires infrastructure. Infrastructure requires centralized coordination. The Federation has the technology to eliminate material want, but it cannot eliminate the political structures that determine who gets access to energy first. And in a crisis, those structures revert to triage. The Federation's refusal to develop certain technologies is equally revealing. It does not deploy automated defense platforms in Federation core space despite having the capability. It does not build self-replicating probe networks despite possessing the underlying technologies. It does not use artificial intelligence for strategic command despite demonstrating functional AI multiple times. These absences are not failures of imagination, they are doctrinal redlines. Autonomous weapons remove human accountability. Self-replicating systems create existential risk. AI command removes democratic oversight. The Federation has decided that these technologies, regardless of tactical value, are incompatible with the political legitimacy it requires to hold its member worlds together. The cost of deployment would be the dissolution of the coalition. The Borg represent the opposite pole. Where the Federation decentralizes, the Borg integrate. Where the Federation relies on culture, the Borg rely on enforced uniformity. The Collective's technological suite, adaptive shielding, nanoprobe assimilation, distributed consciousness, and transwarp conduits, is designed to eliminate individuality, autonomy, and unpredictability. Every drone is a sensor node, every cube is a factory, every encounter is an absorption event. The system does not negotiate, it does not require morale. It does not suffer from command fragmentation. It is the most efficient conversion engine ever depicted on screen, and it loses. The Borg's failure mode is structural. Adaptive shielding works by analyzing incoming fire and modulating defenses in real time. This is devastatingly effective against opponents who rely on repeated applications of the same weapon frequency. It is catastrophic against opponents who randomize, improvise, or use weapons the collective has not encountered before. The Borg do not innovate, they assimilate. They take what others build and integrate it into the collective. But assimilation is a reactive process. The Borg cannot predict what they have not yet encountered. And because the collective prioritizes uniformity, it cannot adapt locally without propagating changes through the entire network. A single starship exploiting a novel tactic can disable a cube because the cube cannot adjust faster than the tactic iterates. This is not a flaw in Borg engineering, it is a flaw in Borg doctrine. The collective assumes that volume of assimilated knowledge will eventually outpace the rate of innovation by individual species. That assumption holds when dealing with isolated civilizations. It breaks when dealing with coalitions that share information faster than the Borg can assimilate it. The Federation, Klingons, and Romulans do not defeat the Borg through superior technology. They defeat the Borg by collaborating, iterating, and refusing to fight the same battle twice. The Borg have no mechanism to counter this because their entire system is built on the assumption that resistance is individual, not collective. Nanoprobe assimilation is similarly double-edged. It allows the Borg to convert biological and technological systems at the cellular level. Once assimilation begins, it is nearly irreversible without immediate medical intervention. This makes the Borg terrifying at close range, but it also makes them dependent on physical proximity. The Borg do not deploy long-range bioweapons. They do not use orbital bombardment. They do not sterilize planets from a distance. They board, they assimilate, they integrate. The tactic works when facing disorganized resistance. It fails when facing opponents who are willing to destroy their own assets rather than let them be assimilated. The Federation scuttles ships. Starfleet captains trigger self-destructs. The Borg have no counter-doctrine for scorched Earth because their entire strategic model is built on acquisition, not denial. Transwarp conduits represent the Borg's logistical advantage. They allow the collective to move forces across the galaxy faster than any other faction. But they also create a single point of failure. Conduits are gooding infrastructure. They can be mapped. They can be targeted. In Endgame, a single neurolytic pathogen introduced into the transwarp hub collapses the collective's ability to project force into the Alpha Quadrant. The Borg's speed advantage becomes a structural vulnerability the moment an opponent discovers the network topology. The Federation does not have this problem because it relies on standard warp travel, which is slower but does not require fixed infrastructure. Decentralization sacrifices speed but eliminates the risk of catastrophic network collapse. The Borg's technological choices are not stupid. They are hyper-rational within the frame of the collective's assumptions. Assimilation is efficient. Uniformity eliminates friction. Centralized consciousness removes command delay. But those assumptions only hold when the enemy plays by the same rules. When the enemy refuses to be predictable, refuses to fight symmetrically, and refuses to preserve assets that can be assimilated, the Borg's advantages invert. They become slower to adapt than their opponents. They become dependent on infrastructure that can be sabotaged. They become incapable of accepting strategic losses because their doctrine does not allow for waste. And waste, the willingness to destroy value to deny it to the enemy, is what stops them. The Romulan Star Empire optimizes for opacity. Its signature technologies, cloaking devices, artificial singularity cores, and isolated computer networks are all designed to operate without revealing capability, position, or intent until the moment of strike. Romulan doctrine assumes that information asymmetry is more valuable than raw firepower. If the enemy does not know where you are, what you have, or what you intend, they cannot counter you. This is not paranoia. It is a rational response to being surrounded by larger coalitions. The cloaking device is the clearest expression of this philosophy. It renders a vessel invisible to most sensors and allows it to maneuver without revealing its position. This grants first strike advantage, strategic reconnaissance, and the ability to withdraw without pursuit. But it also creates a dependency. Romulan ships are optimized for alpha strikes and disengagement. They are not built for sustained combat. When forced to fight without the element of surprise, Romulan warbirds perform poorly relative to their mass and energy output. The Dederidex-class warbird is larger than a Galaxy-class starship, but loses in direct engagements more often than it wins. The size is not for weapons. It is for the singularity core and the cloak. The ship is a delivery platform for a tactical doctrine that collapses when the cloak fails. The Treaty of Algeron prohibits the Federation from developing cloaking technology. This is presented as a concession, but it is also a constraint on the Romulans. The treaty prevents the Federation from matching Romulan stealth, but it also locks the Romulans into a strategic model that depends on maintaining that advantage. If the Federation were to break the treaty, the Romulans would lose their primary tactical edge without gaining an equivalent advantage elsewhere. The treaty does not limit Romulan capability, it limits Romulan flexibility. And the Empire accepts this because the alternative, an arms race in stealth technology with a larger, wealthier opponent, is worse. Artificial singularity cores power Romulan ships but also constrain their design. A singularity core produces more energy per unit of mass than a standard warp core, but it is also unstable, difficult to repair, and requires containment systems that consume significant internal volume. Romulan ships are larger than their Federation counterparts not because they carry more weapons, but because they need more space to manage the reactor. This is a calculated trade. The Singularity Core allows Romulan ships to sustain cloaks and high-energy weapons simultaneously, but it also makes them vulnerable to containment breaches. A single hit to the reactor can destroy the entire ship. The Romulans have chosen to prioritize offensive capability at the cost of survivability. That choice reflects an empire that expects to win quickly or not at all. Romulan information security is equally rigid. Romulan computer networks are not networked in the Federation sense. They are isolated, air-gapped, and compartmentalized. This prevents hacking, prevents data exfiltration, and prevents cascading system failures. But it also prevents real-time coordination between ships. Romulan fleets cannot share targeting data as efficiently as Federation fleets. They cannot synchronize shield modulations. They cannot adapt tactics mid-battle without direct communication. The Romulans have traded operational efficiency for security, and that trade works as long as battles are short. In prolonged engagements, the lack of networked coordination becomes a liability. The Romulan refusal to share technology, even with allies, is not arrogance, it is doctrine. The Tal Shiar exists to prevent technology leakage. Romulan officers who are captured are expected to self-destruct rather than allow interrogation. Romulan ships that are disabled are rigged to erase critical data. The Empire assumes that every technological advantage is temporary, and that the only way to extend its lifespan is to prevent adversaries from studying it. This makes the Romulans poor coalition partners. They do not contribute to joint research. They do not standardize equipment. They do not integrate command structures. And because of this, they are excluded from the intelligence-sharing networks that allow the Federation and Klingons to iterate faster than the Romulans can steal. The contradiction is this: Romulan technology is optimized for secrecy, but secrecy is a wasting asset. The longer the Empire remains isolated, the further it falls behind coalitions that share research and distribute risk. The Romulans cannot afford to break isolation because their legitimacy depends on the perception of superiority. But they also cannot afford to maintain isolation because it guarantees they will be outpaced. The cloaking device buys time. The singularity core buys power, but neither buys allies. And in a galaxy where coalitions determine outcomes, isolation is a slow defeat. The Klingon Empire optimizes for honor-coded shock warfare. Its technologies, disruptors, cloaking devices, and Bat'leth-class cruisers are built for close-range, high-intensity engagements that produce decisive outcomes quickly. Klingon doctrine does not value endurance, logistics, or defensive depth. It values the ability to close with the enemy, deliver overwhelming force, and claim victory in a way that is visible and attributable. This is not because Klingons are scientifically backward. It is because their political system requires individual warriors to claim personal glory. Technologies that distribute credit, such as automated systems or long-range bombardment, undermine the honor economy that holds the Empire together. Klingon disruptors are optimized for hull damage rather than shield penetration. They deliver more kinetic energy per shot than Federation phasers, but are less effective against modulating shields. This makes them devastating in close quarters, where shields are down or degraded, but less effective in standoff engagements. The Klingons have chosen to build weapons that reward aggression and punish hesitation. A captain who closes quickly and fires decisively can tear through an opponent's hull before shields recharge. A captain who hangs back and exchanges long-range fire will lose. The weapon enforces the doctrine. Klingon warships are built for speed and forward firepower. The Bird of Prey class can cloak, maneuver rapidly, and deliver alpha strikes, but it cannot sustain damage. The Vorka-class cruiser has heavier armor and more disruptors, but it is still optimized for frontal assault rather than broadside engagements. Klingon ships do not carry the redundant systems, backup reactors, or repair infrastructure common on Federation vessels. When a Klingon ship is crippled, it is scuttled or abandoned. This is not inefficiency. It is cultural logic. A ship that cannot fight has no value. Rescuing a crippled vessel diverts resources from the next engagement. The Honor Code does not reward survival. It rewards victory or death. Klingon refusal to automate critical systems is deliberate. Klingon ships require larger crews than equivalent Federation vessels because they do not use automation for targeting, navigation, or damage control. This increases manpower costs and reduces operational efficiency. But it also ensures that every victory can be attributed to the skill and courage of individual warriors. If a ship is destroyed, the crew died in battle. If a ship wins, the crew earned glory. Automation would dilute that attribution. It would make victory a function of programming rather than valor. The Klingon High Command has rejected automation not because they lack the technology, but because it is incompatible with the political economy of honor that legitimizes their rule. The Klingon Empire has transporter technology but does not deploy personal transporters or site-to-site transport for individual warriors. Klingon soldiers beam down in groups and fight as units. They do not use transporters to extract wounded, to reposition mid-battle, or to bypass obstacles. This is not a technological limitation, it is a doctrinal choice. Transporting out of combat is retreat. Retreat is dishonorable. The technology exists, but the culture forbids its use in ways that would contradict the Honor Code. And because the Honor Code cannot be violated without destabilizing the political hierarchy, the technology is constrained. The contradiction lies in this. The Klingon Empire is technologically capable of fighting extended wars of attrition, deploying automated defense networks, and using long-range bombardment to achieve strategic objectives without risking personnel. But doing so would require dismantling the honor economy that justifies warrior-class dominance. The great houses maintain power because they control warriors who earn glory in battle. If battles are won by machines, the warriors lose status. If the warriors lose status, the great houses lose legitimacy. The Empire has chosen to fight inefficiently because efficiency would be politically catastrophic, and that choice locks them into a strategic model where they can win battles but struggle to win wars. The Cardassian Union optimizes for resource extraction and population control. Its technologies, orbital weapons platforms, Obsidian Order surveillance networks and labor camp infrastructure are designed to administer occupied populations, suppress dissent, and extract maximum economic value from minimal investment. Cardassian engineering is not elegant. It is brutal and functional. Systems are built to operate under resource scarcity, to degrade gracefully, and to prioritize regime stability over operational efficiency. Cardassian warships are heavily armored but undergunned relative to their size. The Galor-class cruiser is comparable in mass to a Federation Galaxy-class starship, but carries fewer weapons and weaker shields. The difference is not a failure of engineering, it is a budgetary choice. Cardassian ship construction prioritizes hull integrity and crew survivability because the Union cannot afford to replace trained personnel quickly. A Cardassian captain is expected to bring the ship home damaged rather than win decisively and lose the vessel. This doctrine reflects an empire that is resource-poor and manpower constrained. Every ship lost is a permanent reduction in capability. Every engagement is a risk calculation weighted toward preservation. Cardassian occupation infrastructure is the clearest expression of their technological philosophy. Terok Nor, later Deep Space Nine, is designed to process ore, monitor the local population, and project force across Bajor without requiring a large garrison. The station's systems are modular, repairable with limited resources, and designed to operate even when understaffed. The Cardassians built it, expecting that they would eventually face supply disruptions, personnel losses, and infrastructure degradation. The design reflects an empire that knows it is overextended and is building for decline rather than expansion. Cardassian replicator rationing is not a technological limit. Cardassian replicators function identically to Federation models. The rationing is political. The Cardassian state rations replicator access to maintain control over the population. If basic goods are freely available, the state loses leverage. If the population depends on the state for food, water, and medicine, the state retains coercive power. The technology exists to eliminate scarcity, but the regime chooses not to deploy it because scarcity is a tool of governance, and that choice is baked into the infrastructure. Cardassian replicators are networked, monitored, and centrally controlled. The system is designed to track who uses them, when, and for what. The Obsidian Order does not just watch citizens, it watches what they eat. The Obsidian Order itself represents the Union's technological approach to internal security. It does not rely on military force to suppress dissent. It relies on surveillance, informants, and selective enforcement. Cardassian citizens self-censor because they assume they are being watched. The surveillance may be partial, inconsistent, or intermittent, but the fear is constant. The Order's power is not proportional to its actual capability. It is proportional to the population's belief in its omniscience. And that belief is maintained through carefully staged public examples, disappearances, and the occasional arrest. The technology serves the theater. The theater maintains control. Cardassian refusal to invest in scientific research is a rational response to resource constraints. The Union does not have the energy surplus, the educational infrastructure, or the political stability to fund long-term research programs. It cannot compete with the Federation in innovation, so it does not try. Instead, it steals, reverse engineers, and adapts technologies developed by others. This is not a sign of backwardness, it is strategic efficiency. Why spend decades developing a new weapons system when you can acquire one through espionage, strip it down, and integrate the components into existing platforms? The Cardassians have optimized for speed of deployment rather than originality, and in a resource-scarce environment, that is the correct choice. The contradiction is this. Cardassian technology is designed to manage decline, but managing decline does not prevent it. The Union's infrastructure is brittle, its economy is extractive, and its population is resentful. The surveillance state prevents open revolt, but it does not generate loyalty. The occupation of Bajor extracts resources, but it also creates resistance movements that drain military capacity. The Cardassians are trapped in a cycle where the tools they use to maintain control are the same tools that guarantee they will eventually lose it. They cannot reform because reform would require dismantling the surveillance and rationing systems that keep the regime in power. And they cannot continue as they are because the resource base is finite and the subject populations are radicalizing. Midway through this analysis, the pattern sharpens. Factions do not choose technologies based on what is possible. They choose based on what their political systems can tolerate. The Federation cannot deploy autonomous weapons without undermining democratic legitimacy. The Borg cannot tolerate individuality without fracturing the collective. The Romulans cannot share intelligence without sacrificing the secrecy that compensates for their smaller size. The Klingons cannot automate warfare without destroying the honor economy. The Cardassians cannot eliminate scarcity without losing coercive leverage. Every faction's technological suite is a reflection of its survival constraints. And those constraints, more than capability, determine outcomes. The Dominion optimizes for biological control and logistical denial. Its technologies, Ketracel White Dependency, Jem'Hadar Shock Infantry, Changeling Infiltration, and Portable Shrouding, are designed to ensure that subject species cannot defect, cannot rebel, and cannot be used against the Founders even if captured. Dominion technology is not about superiority. It is about irreversibility. Once integrated into the Dominion, a species cannot leave. The Vorta are genetically loyal. The Jem'Hadar are biochemically dependent. The subject worlds are economically integrated. There is no exit. Ketracel White is the purest expression of this philosophy. It is a synthetic compound that the Jem'Hadar require to survive. Without it, they suffer withdrawal, pain, and death within days. The Founders control the supply. The Vorta distribute it. The Jem'Hadar obey because disobedience means death. This is not a side effect of Jem'Hadar biology. It is an engineered dependency. The Founders could have created soldiers who do not require external biochemical support. They chose not to. The dependency is the control mechanism. It ensures that even if a Jem'Hadar unit is cut off from the Dominion, even if it defeats its enemy and captures territory, it cannot survive independently. The moment supply lines are severed, the unit dies. The Dominion has weaponized logistics. Jem'Hadar ships reflect the same logic. They are fast, expendable, and built without escape pods or life support redundancy. A Jem'Hadar attack ship is designed to deliver troops, engage in close combat, and if necessary, ram the enemy. The crew does not expect to retreat. The ship does not carry repair infrastructure. When the mission is complete or the ship is crippled, it is abandoned. The Dominion does not invest in crew survivability because the Jem'Hadar are replaceable. The Founders do not value individual lives. They value operational tempo. A military that does not slow down to recover wounded or repair damaged vessels can sustain offensive pressure longer than opponents who do. The Dominion's strategic advantage is not superior technology. It is the willingness to accept losses that other factions cannot. Changeling infiltration is a weapon without a direct technological counter. A shapeshifter can assume any form, mimic any individual, and penetrate any security system that relies on physical identification. The only reliable defense is blood screening, and even that requires constant vigilance and institutional paranoia. The Dominion does not deploy changelings to win battles. It deploys them to fracture coalitions. A single changeling posing as a Starfleet admiral can issue orders that redirect fleets, undermine alliances, and create strategic confusion. The Federation cannot counter this without implementing pervasive surveillance and suspicion-based vetting, which would undermine the trust that holds the coalition together. The Dominion's infiltration strategy is designed to force the Federation to choose between security and legitimacy. Either way, the Federation loses. Portable shrouding technology allows Jem'Hadar troops to cloak individually in the field. This eliminates the need for fixed infrastructure, allows ambushes without preparation, and prevents the enemy from establishing secure perimeters. Federation soldiers cannot hold territory if they do not know when or where the enemy will strike. The Shroud is not a replacement for orbital bombardment or artillery. It is a tool for denying the enemy the ability to consolidate gains. The Dominion does not need to win every engagement. It only needs to make occupation untenable, and the Shroud ensures that every piece of captured ground remains contested. The Dominion's refusal to integrate cybernetic enhancement is deliberate. The Founders could enhance Jem'Hadar soldiers with implants, neural interfaces, or mechanical augmentation. They choose not to. The reason is simple. Cybernetics create vulnerabilities. A cyborg can be hacked, an implant can be tracked, a neural interface can be subverted. The Founders do not trust technology they cannot biologically control. Jem'Hadar soldiers are entirely organic except for their weapons. They cannot be reprogrammed, they cannot be turned. They cannot be disabled remotely. The Dominion has chosen biological determinism over technological augmentation because biology, when engineered correctly, cannot be hacked. The contradiction is this: the Dominion's control mechanisms work perfectly until they do not. Ketracel-White dependency ensures loyalty, but it also creates a single point of failure. If the supply is disrupted, the entire Jem'Hadar military collapses. Changeling infiltration fractures enemy coalitions, but it also makes the Dominion dependent on a small number of operatives who cannot be replaced quickly. Portable shrouding allows asymmetric warfare, but it does not allow the Dominion to hold territory or administer populations. The Dominion is optimized for conquest, not governance. It can take ground, it struggles to keep it. And when the Alpha Quadrant powers disrupt supply lines, blockade Ketracel-White production, and implement blood screening protocols, the Dominion's advantages invert. The soldiers starve. The infiltrators are discovered. The Shrouds become irrelevant when the enemy refuses to occupy contested ground. The Dominion War is not won by superior technology. It is won by supply chain interdiction, intelligence sharing, and coalition endurance. The Federation, Klingons, and Romulans do not outbuild the Dominion, they outlast it. They force the Dominion to fight on multiple fronts, stretch its logistics beyond sustainability, and deny it the quick victory its doctrine requires. The Dominion has the capability to win battles. It does not have the infrastructure to win wars. And that gap, the difference between tactical capability and strategic endurance, is what destroys it. The late-game clincher is this: the Breen energy-dampening weapon disables every Federation and Klingon ship it hits in a single shot. Shields do not stop it. Countermeasures do not block it. When the Breen deploy it during the Second Battle of Chintoka, the Allied fleet is annihilated. Starfleet loses more ships in one engagement than in the previous 6 months of the war. The weapon represents a total asymmetry. The Breen have developed a technology that the Federation cannot counter with existing systems. And yet, within weeks, Starfleet engineers develop a countermeasure, not because they are smarter, not because they have better technology, but because the Federation's decentralized research infrastructure allows parallel problem-solving across hundreds of ships and stations simultaneously. The Breen developed the weapon in secret. Starfleet develops the counter in public. The speed of iteration is the advantage. The Breen optimized for secrecy. Starfleet optimized for collaboration. And in a war of adaptation, collaboration wins. This reframes the entire conflict. The Dominion and the Breen both possess game-changing technologies: Ketracel-White dependency, changeling infiltration, energy-dampening weapons. But game-changing technologies only matter if the enemy cannot adapt faster than you can deploy. The Federation adapts by sharing information, distributing research, and allowing individual ships to test solutions independently. The Dominion adapts by waiting for the Founders to assimilate intelligence and propagate changes through the Vorta hierarchy. The structural difference is fatal. The Federation iterates in weeks. The Dominion iterates in months. And months is too slow. Every faction's technological choices create predictable failure modes. The Federation's decentralization creates rogue actors, and Section 31. The Borg's uniformity creates catastrophic vulnerability to novel tactics. The Romulans' secrecy creates strategic isolation. The Klingons' honor code creates logistical inefficiency. The Cardassians' surveillance state creates resentment and resistance. The Dominion's biological control creates single points of failure. None of these are mistakes, they are trade-offs. And every trade-off reflects a deeper assumption about what the state can afford to risk. The real pattern is this: technological superiority is always temporary. It lasts until the opponent adapts, steals, or finds a workaround. The only sustainable advantage is structural. The Federation's advantage is not its warp drive or its phasers. It is its ability to integrate new members, share research, and distribute decision-making without fracturing. The Dominion's advantage is not Ketracel White or changelings. It is its ability to enforce loyalty without negotiation. The Klingons' advantage is not their disruptors. It is their ability to mobilize warriors quickly without requiring logistical preparation. These structural advantages cannot be stolen. They cannot be reverse-engineered. They can only be replicated by restructuring the entire political system. And most states cannot do that without collapsing. Technology in Star Trek is not a ladder of progress. It is a map of institutional priorities. The Federation builds tools that empower individuals because it is a coalition of democracies that cannot survive without consent. The Borg build tools that eliminate individuality because the collective cannot function without uniformity. The Romulans build tools that preserve secrecy because they are surrounded by larger enemies. The Klingons build tools that glorify combat because their political system is built on warrior status. The Cardassians build tools that maintain control because their regime depends on coercion. The Dominion builds tools that prevent defection because it rules through engineered dependency. Each faction has the scientific capability to build what the others have built. What separates them is not knowledge. It is the recognition that certain technologies, no matter how effective, would destroy the political system that deploys them. The outcome of galactic conflict is not determined by who has the best weapons. It is determined by whose doctrine aligns most closely with the conditions they are forced to fight under. The Federation wins the Dominion War not because it has superior ships, but because the war becomes a contest of endurance and adaptation, and the Federation's decentralized structure is optimized for both. The Borg lose to isolated starships not because they lack firepower, but because their uniformity prevents them from adapting faster than a creative individual. The Romulans remain a regional power not because they lack scientific capability, but because their obsession with secrecy prevents them from forming the coalitions that would allow them to compete with the Federation. Technology does not predict victory. Doctrine does. And doctrine is always shaped by fear. The Federation fears tyranny, so it decentralizes. The Borg fear chaos, so they enforce uniformity. The Romulans fear exposure, so they isolate. The Klingons fear dishonor, so they ritualize violence. The Cardassians fear rebellion, so they surveil. The Dominion fears defection, so they engineer dependency. Every technological choice is a response to that fear. Every weapon is an attempt to prevent the collapse the state has already imagined. And the factions that survive are not the ones with the best technology. They are the ones whose fears align most closely with the threats they actually face.